The mark of the beast and the image of the beast have been the most popular topics of biblical prophecy in the last few decades. As the monetary system made massive changes in the 20th century, many modern Bereans recognized its eschatological significance. But before we dive in, it's important to establish what the Bible says about money.
The Bible doesn't really define the function of money, but it does describe in great detail the effects of money. Money has taken hundreds of forms over thousands of years, and money's been iron bars, silver, gold, and copper nuggets, dust bars and coins. It's been seashells, it's been salt, it's been fancy pieces of paper, and it's been electrons accessible with cryptographic security. So the Bible, like I said, doesn't really define what money is, but it does get into great detail as to the effects of money or what money does.
We know that it's not money itself, but the love of money, which can bring all kinds of evil. In the year 1900, the Gold Standard Act established gold as the only standard for redeeming paper money. In 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, to monitor exchange rates and lend to nations. This also made the US dollar as the only fiat convertible to gold. The system officially collapsed on August 15, 1971, when President Nixon ended the gold standard for good.
Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States. Now, what does this action, which is very technical, what does it mean for you? Let me lay to rest the bugaboo of what is called devaluation. If you want to buy a foreign car or take a trip abroad, market conditions may cause your dollar to buy slightly less. But if you are among the overwhelming majority of Americans who buy American-made products in America, your dollar will be worth just as much tomorrow as it is today. The effect of this action, in other words, will be to stabilize the dollar.
Ever since then, the dollar has continued to lose value. In fact, $1 in 1971 is equivalent to just 16 cents in 2019, with an annual inflation rate of 3.91%.
In full cooperation with the International Monetary Fund and those who trade with us, we will press for the necessary reforms to set up an urgently needed new international monetary system. Stability and equal treatment is in everybody's best interest. I am determined that the American dollar must never again be a hostage in the hands of international speculators.
But even more, the kind of frivolous spending by our military-industrial complex might be the most absurd yet unpunishable public crime of our generation, enabling the kind of corrupt systems like human trafficking, arms dealing, and drug smuggling to become the way of the world. In other words, we no longer have a form of sound money.
I would say that money must be a long-term store of value and a unit of account that is portable, durable, divisible, interchangeable, and scarce. Now, with that definition in mind, I no longer consider the US dollar and any other fiat currency to be money, because trillions, as we will see, have been printed up. And that literally devalues the function of our labor.
If you look at how upside down the world is, if there's something that there's a little bit of, something that's rare, it's usually valuable. If there's a lot of something, it's usually not very valuable at all. Yet in the world that you and I live in, one of the most greatest things that exist in the monetary sphere is the US Treasury debt. The amount of paper that we have printed is, like, on a domestic level, 21 trillion. On a global level, and what we owe on what's called unfunded liabilities, you're talking between 70 and 200 trillion dollars. And yet it's perceived, and this is partly by the manipulation from the top or the media, and that is that the safest thing you can own is one of those pieces of paper. And yet they're so plentiful, they're really worthless in reality. But in our reality, they're considered to be safe as can be. There's nothing more safe than the debt of the United States government. And this, of course, is an absolute fallacy. It's not true whatsoever. Something like silver, that there really is only about 2.5 billion ounces that are in investable form, meaning like commercial grade bars, investment grade bars, or coins of any denomination, either government minted or privately minted. And so if you think, well, 2.5 billion ounces versus 7 billion people on a planet, basically it's less than half an ounce per person. And if that represented all the money in the world, and that's money, not fiat, not an edict, not a piece of paper, then it shows you how upside down things really are.
Since 2008, approximately $40 trillion has been printed up just by the United States Federal Reserve alone to bail out the big banks, to fund the Pentagon as an enforcement arm for the United States dollar. And the bad bets that Wall Street has made, I mean, the really bad bets, have been absorbed by the United States Federal Reserve to the point of about 3.5 trillion. So when you add $29 trillion worth of bailouts by Wall Street on behalf of the Federal Reserve, plus about $6.5 trillion that has gone, quote unquote, missing from the Pentagon in an effort to enforce the value of the US dollar around the world, plus about $3.5 trillion, that's about $40 trillion. Now, that number is just so abstract that the average person can't relate to it. So let me break that down for you. When you take $40 trillion and you divide it by the number of households in America, that works out to about $315,000 per household, which is nuts. That is more than enough to pay off all, I repeat, all residential mortgages in the United States. So back to your question about gold. Gold has been the #1 standard by far of what money has been and still is in many cultures, because it is a natural product. It is a natural resource. It exists in the earth. It can't be simply conjured up by authorized keyboards. And that standard has been in place for about 5,000 years, and it has been keeping pace with population until the post-World War II period, where we got into fiat currencies at the rate of about a 2% per year increase. So in other words, the production of gold has kept up until the post-World War II period, meaning that the value of gold has been stable as a way of conducting commerce between people. Now, that's just the backstory about gold, the brief history about gold, but gold also has spiritual qualities according to the Bible. In 1 Kings 20 verse 3, we read, "Thy silver and thy gold is mine, thy wives and also thy children, even the goodliest are mine." In other words, God values gold and silver and everything that you have. If you're a Christian, you're just really a steward. You don't own anything. God owns everything that you have, including you and your family. And because God made gold and silver as natural resources, natural elements that can't be corrupted, natural resources that have been keeping pace with the population for about 5,000 years, it's been a remarkable standard. And like I said, it's only been in the past 60 years or so where we have literally gone off the deep end and have created mountains of debt, which are just totally unnatural as opposed to God's standards.
The reshuffling of the financial infrastructure after World War II also allowed for a system of hidden finance to develop right under our noses. The term breakaway civilization was coined by leading UFO researcher and author Richard Dolan to describe an elite class of humans who would have access to this hidden economy in order to conduct experiments in pursuit of their so-called ascension.
We're corrupt from the top down. We're run by a bunch of gangsters, a bunch of criminals. That's the way I see it, and I think it can be proven that most at the top are sociopaths, psychopaths, or both. So we're in a system that's corrupt, and it's corrupted everything. It's corrupted the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, the educational system, the political system, the monetary system, and actually the social interaction system. I mean, this is one of my pet peeves, having two millennials, two daughters, a 25, well, soon to be 25 and a 24-year-old, and they are a good example of being locked down into this paradigm that's in this little machine that is, what is it, 4.5 inches by 2.5 inches by, 3/4 of an inch wide. And they're locked into this idea that the smartphone is somehow helping them when actually it's sucking the life force right out of them. I mean, this is probably one of my biggest concerns, is where technology is taking society at large.
It is commonly believed that these individuals and families reside amidst international bankers and religious institutions like the Vatican. But the unseen bodies who are behind the advancement and emergence of the cyber-hive Earth economy are perhaps far more ancient in origin.
Matthew 6:24, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. Now, it's very interesting that the Hebrew word for money is mammon. And that word has been characterized over many centuries as being synonymous with an evil spirit that can hover over money or be expressed through money should people choose to make money their master instead of God. So it's been anthropomorphized, if you will, in many cases where people are addicted to money. Money can be deceitful in that at the times where you have a lot of it, you tend to think more highly of yourself than you should. So money is kind of a double-edged sword. We need it, obviously, to put food on the table, but we can lust after it and make it our God. And spiritually speaking, the Bible clearly warns in hundreds of verses that there is a spiritual effect behind money if we choose to become addicted to it.
In Ezekiel chapter 8, God shows the prophet Ezekiel the truth concerning what the elders of Israel were up to in the darkness. It is interesting to note that the chapter begins by indicating the 6th year, on the 6th month, on the 5th day, as if to indicate the state of affairs just a day before the alignment of 666. God shows Ezekiel the north gate, where they were provoking the idol of jealousy. Then he was shown inside the court through a hole in the wall, leading to a doorway that led to rooms with drawings of detestable beasts along with all the idols of the house of Israel. There were the 70 elders, each with a censer in his hand, worshipping at the shrine of their own idol. Ezekiel was shown a woman sitting at the entrance of the north gate weeping for Tammuz, an ancient Mesopotamian god. And in the inner court, 25 men faced east, worshipping the sun, with their backs turned to the temple of the Lord. This account of the elders of Israel secretly worshipping creation, beasts, and demonic gods is still happening today. In fact, the connection between occult rituals and the emergence of the cyber-hive Earth in the 20th century are also well documented for our knowledge.
Religion is merging, the one worldism and religion is merging together. And at the same time, this technocratic meme around the world is everywhere now. We've got to take care of Mother Earth. It's just like what the Bible says, they will worship the creation instead of the creator. So, people say stuff, and I look at it anymore, I say, well, that's part of the whole deception. I don't care what the specific words are, but it's still part of the deception, because if you don't believe in the historic truth that the Bible lays out, you can believe anything, absolutely anything. You can say anything, almost do anything, think anything, and science is becoming a religious experiment.
In an invitation-only meeting in 1942, Frank Fremont Smith, the executive of the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation, who for the span of 20 years organized many events including the Macy Cybernetics Conferences, sponsored the Cerebral Inhibition Meeting. His mission was to investigate the, quote, physiological mechanisms underlying the phenomena of conditioned reflexes and hypnosis as related to the problem of cerebral inhibition. Attendees included Gary Bateson, an anthropologist and cyberneticist who is famously known for his theory of the double bind, a communication paradox that is found in schizophrenics. Also attending was Lawrence K. Frank, who in his book The Conduct of Sex, Biology and the Ethics of Sex and Parenthood wrote, quote, we can say that in our country today, many people are openly ignoring or rejecting the codes and prohibitions expressed in our traditional sex morals. This brings home the realization that we have no adequate sex ethics. A humanly desirable social order can be attained only as we recognize our enduring goals and strive to make them operational in terms of contemporary needs and opportunities. Ethical conduct, therefore, may be looked upon as a circular, reciprocal relationship, and, as such, should be the guide to all fulfilling human relationships. In other words, he was suggesting that the codes of ethics for relationships between any two individuals ought to be approached systematically by considering one's own response to the system. But the problem with this approach is that humans are not perfect as we can perceive perfection. This is precisely the sin virus in action, confusing the infrastructure that belongs to God and making us think we ought to be at the center of the equation. The next at the meeting was Margaret Mead, a staple in modern anthropology, whose controversial work advocating adolescent promiscuity in South Pacific and Southeastern Asian traditions is another example of breaking down the ethics of family by way of lust. Also invited was Warren Sturgis McCulloch, whose 1943 paper titled A Logical Calculus of Ideas Immanent in Nervous Activity became widely credited with being a seminal contribution to neural network theory, the theory of automata, the theory of computation, and cybernetics. Then there is Arturo Rosenbluth, a Mexican researcher, physician, and one of the pioneers of cybernetics, who would go on to receive grants from the Rockefeller Foundation, both between 1947 and 49, and again in 1951 to 52. And finally, Lawrence Kuby, a psychoanalyst from New York, who proposed the theory of closed reverberating circuits to explain neurosis, a disorder that is now known as OCD, anxiety, hysteria, and other various phobias. It is interesting to note that all of the worldviews presented by these individuals have been externalized into society to the point of redefining the nature of human relationship and intimacy in our generation. And again, this unique collection of people had two topics at the cerebral inhibition meeting: hypnotism and conditioned reflex, or classical conditioning, a learned procedure made famous by the Pavlov's dog experiment. A picture presented by the art of Suzanne Treister, called Hexen 2.0, shows a cybernetic seance in New York 1947. Included in the picture is Mead, McCulloch, Rosenbluth, Bateson, Lawrence K. Frank Fremont Smith, and many others, including Norbert Weiner, the man deemed the father of cybernetics. So what sort of conjuring might have taken place at this seance, and to what end did they envision as the fulfillment of their plan? Norbert Weiner, in Cybernetics, or Control and Communication in the Animal and the Machine, stated, quote, "Let us remember that the automatic machine is the precise economic equivalent of slave labor. Any labor which competes with slave labor must accept the economic consequences of slave labor." In other words, what they may have wanted is an automated economy with enslaved men and machines. To better understand what this is, we can turn to the scriptures.
Money is a symbolic token for human life. If you think of all the thousands of hours you spend throughout your whole working life, earning money to put food on the table and hopefully save for a rainy day, the bankers throughout history are more than aware that your life is tied up to a great degree in the pursuit of money. So the bankers are more than aware that when they make financial manipulations, they are actually manipulating your life. It's not just numbers on a computer screen that we're familiar with in 21st century. We're talking about slavery.
The curses found in the early chapters of Genesis, culminating in the book of Revelation with the mark of the beast and the worship of the image of the beast, have one thing in common: economic slavery. Genesis 3:17 in the Berean Study Bible translation says, "And to Adam he says, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree from which I commanded you not to eat, cursed is the ground because of you. Through toil you will eat of it all the days of your life." Merriam-Webster defines slavery as drudgery or toil. Through this curse, mankind, through Adam, is enslaved to the earth itself for sustenance, as opposed to the freely accessible fruit in the Garden of Eden. The evolution of civilizations in our fallen world have been determined by their ability to more efficiently minimize the toil and maximize the output of goods and services for the sustenance of a given population. The sin virus is tangibly evident in the entire concept of human civilizations and their economies. The first city mentioned after the fall of man is Enoch, named after Cain's first son, not to be confused with the son of Jared found in Genesis 5, although it is fascinating to consider that there is an Enoch that was taken to heaven, as well as an Enoch, the son of the first human murderer. Genesis 4 verses 17 through 26 zooms in on the lineage of Cain and what the Bible tells us about his family business. Jabal made tents and owned cattle. Jubal was the father of instruments and music. Tubal-Cain worked with brass and iron. And while all these skills can fall under the heading of toil, and thus economic slavery, they mostly appear to be knowledge handed down from the Watchers. In chapter 8 of the book of Enoch, the Watchers who taught mankind various things are even named. Quote, "And Azazel taught man to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth, and the art of working them, and bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray, and became corrupt in all their ways." A communication between divine beings and fallen humans established a kind of mingling that was detrimental to mankind. Its infrastructure for civilization was destructive. In fact, this pattern of divine beings providing destructive knowledge to humans is also found in Psalm 82, the famous passage about the divine council, where God judges the gods for their misconduct over populations. All of these examples beg the question, is this exchange of knowledge between the Watchers and fallen humans still happening today? It is my personal opinion that it absolutely is. Perhaps the individuals who were involved in the cybernetic seance in 1947 are an example of what Jude 1:11 states, "Woe unto them, for they have gone in the way of Cain." Revelation 18:23 describes the judgment of Mystery Babylon, zooming in on the merchants of the earth. "And the light of the candle shall shine no more at all in thee, and the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee, for thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived." As many have pointed out, the word for sorceries is pharmakia, the Greek root for the English word pharmacy. A list of items that will no longer be sold to the temple includes slaves and the souls of men. The takeaway is that the merchants of the earth deceive the world through sorcery or pharmakia while being in the business of trading slaves and the souls of men. Controlling and enslaving humanity through technology that is indistinguishable from magic was always going to be the natural outcome of the curse over mankind. Just as it was in the days of Cain, we remain in toil and under the supernatural oppression of the tangible economic infrastructure influenced by the non-human spiritual entities running the sin virus through various bloodlines. But the more transparent the cyber-hive Earth economy becomes, the more they will begin to reveal themselves to the public.
The blockchain looks like it's a truth machine.
Right.
I mean, if I do a transaction with you and it's there on that ledger forever, it's hard for me to say, well, no, I didn't. No, it's that date, that time. And that. So I think from that aspect, I think it's very powerful. My problem with all this stuff is that man is corrupt or can be corrupted. And is there a way to fiddle with it or not? I'm not techie enough to know. What I do know is the concept or the principle of it I like. And I think it will be adopted more and more as we're seeing as we speak. I mean, there's all kinds of things coming on the blockchain. There's not only, agricultural products and, cryptocurrencies, but there's just ways of keeping track of payrolls and everything else. So I like it. I like the idea that you have a truth machine that cannot be meddled with. And I put meddled with in quotes because maybe it can be. Again, I do worry about the security. If you look at the top dogs in the data technology world, almost all of them to a man and woman will tell you that they are concerned about security.
So what is the blockchain? Blockchain technology is a decentralized database that stores a registry of assets and transactions across a peer-to-peer network. It's basically a public registry of who owns what and who transacts what. The transactions are secured through cryptography, and over time, that transaction history gets locked in blocks of data that are then cryptographically linked together and secured. This creates an immutable, unforgeable record of all of the transactions across this network. This record is replicated on every computer that uses the network. There are, of course, other technical details to the blockchain, but at its core, that's how it works. It's this public registry that stores transactions in a network and is replicated so that it's very secure and hard to tamper with. Which brings me to my point of how blockchains lower uncertainty and how they therefore promise to transform our economic systems in radical ways. So uncertainty is kind of a big term in economics, but I want to go through 3 forms of it that we face in almost all of our everyday transactions, where blockchains can play a role. We face uncertainties like not knowing who we're dealing with, not having visibility into a transaction, and not having recourse if things go wrong. Blockchains give us the technological capability of creating a record of human exchange of currency, of all kinds of digital and physical assets, even of our own personal attributes in a totally new way. So in some ways, they become a technological institution that has a lot of the benefits of the traditional institutions we're used to using in society. But it does this in a decentralized way. It does this by converting a lot of our uncertainties into certainties. So I think we need to start preparing ourselves, because we're about to face a world where distributed autonomous institutions have quite a significant role.
The blockchain is built by computer users around the world competing to be the first to solve mathematical problems as issued by the central authorities of each cryptocurrency. Each problem requires progressive amounts of computing power to solve, which represents a financial investment. Once a mathematical problem is confirmed to be solved, a cryptocurrency unit is issued to the owner of the computer system which provided the solution as a reward for proof of work. Now keep that phrase, proof of work, in mind. Each mathematical solution is called a block and is linked to other mathematical solutions in a cryptographic chain of data, hence the term blockchain. Now, how does this all fit into a Bible prophecy? Well, like I said before, trust of governments and trusts in the world financial systems is at an all-time low. And when you think about more Bible prophecy, that stands to reason, because the Bible says towards the end of the age, there will be an increase in laws and in lawlessness. So you can't necessarily trust your financial institution anymore. You can't necessarily trust your government anymore, no matter who's in office. So the whole blockchain system of distributed ledger technology should, and I said should, offer us a solution to avoid trust issues. The problem is that the Bible is very clear, especially in the book of Revelation, that there will be some kind of technology, some kind of mark where everyone cannot buy and sell without having access to that mark. And when you think of certain tech lords in Silicon Valley developing technologies like graphene, it certainly stands to reason that the mark, no matter what form it takes eventually, is literally an authentication system, a way for the system to prove who you are so you can get access to that system. It was inconceivable 50 years ago, even 20 years ago, that we would have a computer network system that would control the economies of the entire world. But that day is no longer on the horizon, it's already here. And when you combine quantum computing with artificial intelligence, with the blockchain, and a whole host of other technologies like programmable matter, where you can literally print up the object that you were shopping for online in your own home, then the entire economy that we know of is turned upside down. But that is the point where we are at right now. So it's daunting on one hand and it's exciting on the other, because I have every reason to believe that when you consider about 6,000 years of recorded history, that we have every reason to believe that we are in the final 1% of human history.